Hi there, this is Seth Abramovich, senior writer at The Hollywood Reporter. On this week's episode of It Happened in Hollywood, our Season 3 finale, we're going to be covering the film that laid the groundwork for Downton Abbey. All that and more on It Happened in Hollywood. Okay, welcome back. This has been the most remarkable season. I've had so much fun. I hope you have too. And for our season closer, we have something very special. We have Julian Fellowes. You probably know him from Downton Abbey. He's also the creator and showrunner of Gilded Age, which I'm really enjoying on HBO and which has a second season coming up. But it all started with this film. It was Robert Altman's third to last film from 2001, and it's called Gosford Park. Part of what I love about this story is that Julian Fellowes wrote this around the age of 50 and won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. I love a late bloomer story, and this one takes the cake. He grew up in a sort of diplomat's family in England and very, well-educated, upper crust, and he knew this world because his great aunts and aunts had lived in these sort of Downton Abbey type crumbling empire mansions in England, and he knew the language of it. And he was put together with Robert Altman by Bob Balaban, the actor you probably recognize from a bunch of things, and he's also plays an American movie producer in Gosford Park. They had been working on another project together, and when that one fell apart, they thought maybe this could work. Robert Altman wanted to make some sort of mystery, an Agatha Christie type mystery, and lo and behold, it was movie magic once again. I have never met Julian Fellowes until this episode, and I was so delighted to meet this guy. I mean, he's achieved pretty much anything you can achieve in Hollywood, but he is so down to earth, so self-effacing, so very, very funny. I promise you're going to laugh today. So without further ado, here we go. It's Julian Fellowes and Gosford Park. Julian Fellowes, welcome to It Happened in Hollywood. This is very exciting for me.
Well, it's nice to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Of course, I'm a huge fan of your TV work, Downton Abbey and The Gilded Age. I'm totally into. I'm so excited about season 2. But we are a film history podcast, so we are going to be focusing on Gosford Park, which I think we could probably draw the DNA of Downton Abbey from Gosford Park. Would that be accurate to say?
Yes, definitely, because that was Gareth Neam's specific idea when he made the suggestion of a television series like Downton. He said, would you ever go back into Gosford Park territory for television? So Downton was Gosford's child, but Downton is a sunnier place than Gosford Park. The people are cheerier, things are nicer, everything's happy, really. Bad things happen, but mainly things are happy. Whereas Gosford is about compromise. It's about a series of people upstairs and down who, one way or another, are having to compromise their real beliefs and instincts in order to make the best of a bad job, largely. And so it's a darker place, really.
Darker, and also it has that Robert Altman feel of naturalism, and that you're overhearing conversations, which felt different in tone to Downton, which felt more, I don't know how you would describe it, but more traditional drama. Was that something that you set out to do in collaborating with Robert Altman? Because it definitely fits into his oeuvre.
I think so. I think that very early on, he had this idea of the moving camera. Every single shot in Gosford is a moving shot, apart from one. There's a close-up of the maid, of Mary, through the car, because they were cutting that scene together and they realized they hadn't got that shot. And so they sent the second unit to get it. And no one had explained that every shot had to move. So that's the only one. Apart from that, every shot in the film is moving. And that gave a sense to the audience that they were sort of gliding around these rooms, in and out of these people, moving past them. And I thought it was very, very effective, actually. I thought it was fantastic.
Yes, it's an incredible film. But let's go backwards. We can go as far back as your youth, if you don't mind, because I understand that this world is not foreign to you. In fact, you moved in these kinds of circles. I mean, obviously, you're much younger, but is that correct?
Well, I don't want to overstate the case, but I was aware, even as a child, actually, that I had just missed a whole way of life that had gone only a few years before I was born. Of course, it didn't go totally. I mean, there's still people living in Sloane Square with a butler and a cook. But as a way of life that was practiced in every village all over Europe, it really was the Second World War that rather finished it off. And yet, in my childhood, there were still traces of it. And I would go with my parents and I would stay in these houses. And on the top floor, there would be lines of empty servants' bedrooms, and in some cases with the names still written on them of the last servants to have occupied them. And there was something very, I suppose, moving about that in a way, a sense of a kind of lost civilization that I had stumbled on the remains of at the age of 7 or 8 or whatever I was. And I would talk. I was lucky because I was young, and so several of my great aunts and their cousins and so on were still alive, and they'd lived that life. I mean, my eldest great aunt was born in 1880. She was presented in 1898. She was married shortly after that. They had a house in London and a place in Hampshire, and she lived that life. And then, gradually it was taken away from her, like many of her generation. But I mean, she was essentially older than Kristin Scott Thomas's character, Sylvia. So I was getting a view of that life from the horse's mouth, really. And I feel very benefited by that. I mean, I got interested, too, in my family's history, and they were able to talk about this particular aunt had been out to India on what they used to call the fishing fleet, which was to find a husband if none had materialized in London. And her uncle was the governor of Bombay, and she and her sister were sent out to find husbands. And she came back with one. The other one didn't, but she did. So that other world was quite sort of accessible to me, really, as a child. And I cherished an interest. I went on being interested in history, reading diaries, reading correspondence and that kind of thing. And then finally, when this offer came really out of the blue, thanks to Bob Balaban, because I'd written a script for the actor-producer Bob Balaban, which was never made, but I had. And he, in another part of the forest, he was looking for a writer with Robert Altman who could do a sort of, sort of spoof of a murder mystery set in an English country house. And it was Balaban who said, you won't have heard of this guy, and he's never had a film made, but this is his sort of territory. And Altman rang me up, and we had those terrible conference calls, when you can't really hear what the other person's saying and all that. And in the end, he commissioned it. So I felt tremendously blessed, actually, that the first sort of major feature film anyone had asked me to write was a subject that I had been studying all my life, effectively. So it couldn't really have been better.
I would say, Robert Altman and then this cast, it's just all stars. The biggest British actors of all time are Helen Mirren, Eileen Atkins, Derek Jacobi, Richard Grant. It's unbelievable. Now, before we jump into that, I love one aspect of your career, which is that you did grow up from a diplomatic family, an upper class family in England, but you decided to come to Hollywood and try to make it, which I'm sure was your family was scratching their heads at that decision. And you did have some success in Hollywood.
I did have a bit of success. I did get a bit moving, but actually, it was later when I came to Hollywood in the early 80s. And I lived there for, I forget now, about 2.5, 3 years. And really, I played sort of people who ran hotels or came out from under staircases saying, "Don't worry, princess," But the real achievement of those years was that I reconnected with the camera. Like a lot of kids, I've been interested in films and television and so on. But when I went to the drama school, it was theatre. Got to get back to the boards, got to get back to the stage. And if something is repeated often enough into your ear, you sort of start believing it. It's the sort of theory of the great lie. And I was having a theatre career, and I was in the West End of London for about 5 years doing comedies and things. And then I went to Hollywood, and it sort of reminded me, I wasn't really interested in theatre. I was interested in film. That was where my love lay. And I wasn't interested. I love, good theatre is great, but I love the process of film. I wasn't really interested in the process of theatre. For me, I went from terror to boredom with hardly a middle stage. I was the other day, I was talking to Judi Dench, who is very committed to theatre and is a real, she's very good on camera, but she is a real theatre, great actress. And she was interested in the process of theatre. That was what was so interesting, that the whole process of evolving a play and finding the play as you play it and finding the laughs and all that. And I was like that, but for film. And when I came back, which I did eventually to do a television series, I think, or something like that, that I brought with me that love of film and the camera generally. And I never lost it. So, in fact, those years in Hollywood were very, very helpful to me, really, in the long run.
I would say so. And I'm sure you made a lot of relationships and connections that would go on to serve you, like this one with Bob Balaban.
No, I was very lucky. And I have a great friend out there called Sam Schwartz, who is part of the head of the Gorfaine-Schwartz music agency, music for films. And in those days, we were both so broke that we used to go to Hamburger Hamlet and split a hamburger. That was our treat. We would order it and cut it in half. And so it's quite fun when I see him now. And he's a great movie mogul.
The thought of you eating half a hamburger, I don't know why that really tickles me. Maybe because of all the dining scenes in your shows that are so extravagant. And you're eating a half a hamburger. But, okay, so those successes, and including you were in the film Baby, right? The dinosaur film. The
dinosaur movie, I was. And I enjoyed that. It was great. Of course, it was just before all the tremendous special effects that were to come later. So it was still sort of a dinosaur head operated with 1 million wires coming out of it and people behind you clicking all these wires while the head sort of like this. But I did enjoy it, and I loved that. We were on location in Africa in the Ivory Coast, and then we finished it in Hollywood. It was all very sort of glamorous and fun, I love all that stuff.
Yes, why not? And I mean, you should have been in the Jurassic Park films. You certainly have the Attenborough gravitas.
Well, my great pal Sam Neill was in those. And I thought he was wonderful in them. Actually, I thought they were wonderful films, the Jurassic Park pictures.
Yes, they are. I mean, I'm not sure about these new ones they're making, but they're still going at it. But okay, so let's get back on track. So you've moved back to England. You're acting, and you're also becoming a bit of a BBC star. You have certain you're hosting things.
Yes, I mean, I don't think one should overstate the use of star. I don't think I was ever a star. I got to the point when taxi drivers recognized me. So I don't know what level of fame that is, but I don't think it's probably quite the top tier. But I enjoyed myself, actually. I mean, I was in quite a lot of films and quite a lot of television. I had a very lucky break when Danny Boyle cast me in a show called For the Greater Good, a series. And okay. I had a leading part in that. And that was quite a bit of a lift. And then I went on doing series until I was cast in a show called Monarch of the Glen that was set in Scotland. And during Monarch of the Glen, I wrote Gosford Park. I watched the filming. I had to come onto Monarch late. And then I won the Oscar. And by the time I'd left Monarch of the Glen, I did 5 years. My whole life had really changed. And then I did go on presenting a bit. I did a series about country houses, and I had a game show, and all that sort of thing. But really, from then on, I was a writer. And so I changed gear.
And so I'm curious about that change of gear. I mean, so Robert Altman comes along and asks you to write his next film. Had you been writing until then? Did you have a few screenplays under your belt?
Yes, a couple. I mean, the only things I'd written that had got made was I wrote 3 series for BBC Children's Drama, which in those days was a separate department from drama. It isn't now, I think. But anyway, it was then. And I wrote 3 of them. And the second one particularly was a new version of Little Lord Fauntleroy, and it won an international Emmy, and it did very well. So I wasn't a complete starter, but filmically I was. And one of the sort of données of Hollywood, as I'm sure you know, is that if you're any good, by the time you're in your early 30s, it will have started to manifest itself. So there's really no point in reading a script by an unknown writer of 50, because clearly he or she hasn't got it. And so when I appeared nominated for an Oscar for a script I'd written when I was 51 and nobody had ever heard of me, of course, this was a source of celebration for quite a few people. I was rather thrilled with that. I loved that, because I think it is wrong to assume that any group, you don't have to bother with. There's no point in meeting them. There's no point in reading what they've done. The fact is, people's lives are different, and you come through at different stages. And it worked for me, and there I was, clutching my statuette.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I am always on the warpath against what I feel is rampant ageism in Hollywood, and dismissal of people for whatever reason for being too old. And the fact that it all cracked open for you at 50, not that you hadn't achieved a lot of things, but certainly at this level, it's really inspiring to me, especially having turned 50 this year. So who knows what's in my future? So, okay, so let's go back to that fateful phone call. Robert Altman, obviously a total legend and artist, not just some working stiff, but a real artist auteur. And he comes to you, and you're not quite sure what to make of it. But what does he present to you in terms of the idea, and where do you take it from there?
Well, when the idea was first mooted, I was a bit bewildered as to how it had come to me and everything. But then I had these conversations on the telephone, and finally Altman was encouraged to commission me to write a first draft of a script. Whether that was through Bob Balaban's urging or, whatever. And what I did realize from these conversations, and anyway, obviously, I knew Altman's work, is that he was very much, in those days, the master of Americana. He explored the American way of life, and he would have these films, multi-arc, multi-narrative films. And what I wanted is, I thought, at the moment, he thinks it'd be fun to make a film about an English country house and all the servants and the people upstairs and so on. But he doesn't really know these people. And he is at risk of feeling quite alienated from the material. So what I wanted to do is I went out and I got every film on VHS, as it then was, that I could find. And I played every film for myself, having a sort of Robert Altman festival that went on for a few days. And I made notes of the things that were common to all the films, of the different narrative structures and so on and so forth. Because what I wanted was, when he opened the script, to his surprise, he would recognize the film. He would recognize how to make it. He would immediately understand the language of the film. And I think it worked, actually, not to puff my own trumpet too much, but that he said to me later, I never really believed in this project until I read the first draft. And after that, I was sort of signed up. And so that was very keen. And what was a happy result for me was the whole business of multi-narrative and different lengths of arcs, and some stories being comedic and some stories being tragic, and whatever. This ragbag of human life that was an Altman movie. It suited me. I really liked it. Up until then, I had rather dealt in linear narrative. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then the end. And this wasn't that. This was all different stories, all plaited together. And it was a fashion being explored, in fact, by episodic television in America at that time. And so things like ER and West Wing were quite similar in structure. And it really suited me. So when I'd written the film, and, it turned out pretty well, I sort of wanted to go on with that. So when I took up the idea again with Downton, I did go straight back into that form of narrative. So it was very sort of momentous. If anything about my life is momentous, but it was a momentous change for me. And so it was happy. I mean, then Bob rang me and asked me to fly out to see him in Malibu and work with him for a few days. And I always remember very well that they sent me, a third-class ticket. What do you call it when you're in the back of a plane?
Rat class.
And I said, oh, that's all right. And my wife said, I'm not sure about this, because you may have to work straight away. And I said, no, they've told me I've got a day off to get used to it. I'll be lying in my hotel room, then I'll go to the studio and I'll get started. She said, I'm not sure. I don't really trust that plan. I think we're going to put you into club at least, so you can get some sleep on the plane. So anyway, I traveled in club, which was a huge expense at that time.
Sure.
And I got there, and they said, we're taking you straight to the studio. You're following this car in the car we've hired for you, and Bob's waiting for you. So actually, it was money well spent. But I went there, and we worked together. Bob had a very interesting imagination, and he had very good ideas. He wanted, for instance, he wanted to have organic music and not just soundtrack. And he came up with the idea of having Ivan the Velvet. Now, he didn't really know anything about Ivan the Velvet, but that was fine because that was my job. And so I went away and read biographies of Ivan the Velvet. And I came up with the very happy discovery that Ivor Novello, at the period we had decided on for the movie, which was November 1932, was a very, very low patch for him, because he'd been a big silent movie star. And then talkies didn't really suit him because the public wanted something different from their talkie stars. They didn't want Rudolph Valentino anymore. They wanted James Cagney. It was a whole shift. And he tried to get round this by remaking one of his greatest silent hits, which was called The Lodger. An early Hitchcock film, something he overlooked perhaps. But anyway, he remade it as a talkie. And it came out in 1932 and was a total flop. And so he thought his career was over. Now, it wasn't actually at all. And soon he would start writing the great musicals and operettas of Perchance the Dream and Glamorous Nights and King's Rhapsody and all of that. But that was still to come. And at this time that we dealt with him, he felt a failure. Now, of course, for me as the writer, to have a movie star in a film is rather a mixed blessing because they're not very sympathetic types. But to have a movie star who thinks he's a failure was much, much better. So then I got terribly excited about the whole thing. And Bob cast Jeremy Northam, who I thought gave a wonderful performance. And he also could sing and played the piano. Some of the piano is played by his brother, who is a concert pianist, but most of it is played by Jeremy, which I thought was pretty good. You know, you could have the camera going from the hands to the face without a problem. And I thought that turned out to be a very strong strand in the movie, in fact. But Bob had other ideas. I mean, he was very good, you know, because after all, there we were. Nobody had ever heard of me, and I'd never had a film script made. He was very much an icon of his period, of that time of filmmaking. But we that never played much of a part in it. We were just two fat men arguing behind the camera. And he never sort of broke from that. So I loved him.
Just to go back to Ivor, I love that character, and Jeremy Northam is amazing, and that's him singing as well, right?
Yes.
Somewhere there's another land, different from this world.
Stand at my shoulder and watch me, please.
Far more mercifully planned than the cruel place we know. Innocence and peace are there.
Do you think it'll be as long as he usually is?
All is good that is desired.
I think it's rather wonderful. I think it's rather wonderful.
Love goes never wrong, nor tired.
But I have only seen one.
We shall never find that lovely land of might have been. I shall never be your king, nor you shall be my queen. Days may pass and years.
Are those songs that he sings actual Ivor Novello songs of the era?
Yes. Yes, they're all Ivor Novello songs. And we had to be quite careful to only choose Ivor Novello songs from before November 1932. Mm-hmm. And the one I always rather like, but was after 1932, is Waltz of My Heart. Waltz of My Heart, blah, 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 blah. And I put it in, cheating really, I put it in, but one of the characters, I think it's Sylvia, says, "Oh, I don't know that one." And he says, "Oh, it's just something I'm fiddling with." So the idea was that he started, but he hadn't released it.
Right.
So that's a little joke for me in the film.
You're not going to provide entertainment.
Jennings, could I have one of those martinis, please?
Yes, ma'am. That's how you got your invitation. watch your beef.
No, don't get up. Please, go on, please.
Lovely, lovely.
Stop.
This is
Thank you. What is it? I don't recognise it.
Start. There's something I'm working on.
I can't imagine how one ever goes about inventing a tune. Where do you start?
Good evening. Rather difficult to say.
Well, I think you're too clever for words.
Good evening.
Hello.
Lovely dress.
Thank you.
Bob was the big Ivan the Velatan.
Oh, no kidding. He's singing about how he can never be alone with his sweetheart because she always brings her brother or the mother. I love that song. Very funny. So is it true that Robert Altman gives you a list of actors that are going to be in the film and you have to write characters for them, or is that just myth?
No, that's myth. But what he did like to do was he liked to cast very well-known actors, if he could, to play more or less every part, even the tiny ones. And I asked him once why he did that. I said, is it a sort of show-offy thing, or what's the point of it? And he said, I tell you what, I like to have lots of plots and lots of characters. And if you cast famous actors in all of the parts, the audience will know who they all are, and they won't muddle them up. But if you cast unknowns and you have 40 characters all with different stories, they get them all muddled, which I thought was rather sensible, actually. But no, he cast these characters. And of course, the actors that he and Mary Selway lined up were quite astonishing. And I think a lot of that was that Bob was in his 70s then, and he'd never made a British movie. And it was pretty unlikely that there would be another British movie. So if you were a British actor and you wanted to be in an Altman movie, this was it. You didn't really have a lot of choice, whether you thought it was good or bad when you read the script. I mean, we did get turned down by a couple. And one, rather charmingly, later came up to me and said, I made a mistake. I should have taken it. Because I remember, to be nameless, but his agent was my agent. And she rang me and said, he says he's only got, whatever it was, 15 lines or something. And I said, it's not that sort of film. They're all going to be on the screen all the time. And nobody is going to notice who's saying what. It's all just going to be one long hubble bubble going on. And, but of course, he didn't really believe me. And so he didn't do the film. But I thought it was very charming when he later said he thought he ought to have done it, because it's quite successful. But anyway, I was thrilled. I mean, you can imagine this is the first film script you've written that anyone's making. And you start with sort of Michael Gambon and Maggie Smith and go on, and Kristin Scott Thomas and Alan Bates and Helen. I mean, who could have dreamt it? It was the most extraordinary fantasy. And I used to go in to the office, the pre-production office, quite often. And there would be the blackboard covered in photographs of actors who were going to be in the film. I couldn't believe it. It was like a sort of panoply of the most famous actors in Britain. It was extraordinary, really.
Unbelievable. And so were you on set? You said you were arguing behind the camera. So were you there?
Yes, I was on set, which is very unusual, as you know, for a writer. I mean, writers are usually as welcome as diphtheria on a set. But and they have you there sort of 3 or 4 times just as a courtesy, but that's it.
Right.
And there is actually a reason for that. I know that probably my fellow union members will be annoyed with me for saying this, but there is a moment where what you intended in the scene is less important than what the director intends. You can't really have 2 people working with the actor to get to the core of the scene. By then, of course, as a writer, you hope, like Billio, that the director sees your vision of the script, But of course, that doesn't always happen, certainly not in every scene. But in this instance, what happened was Bob got to England in about, I suppose, November, something like that. He'd done the Venice Festival, and then they took a flat near Kensington Gardens, and they moved over, he and Catherine. And more people kept saying to him, God, you're making a film about the English class system. Good luck with that. And this went on and on. And he'd had a bit of a kicking for Dr. T and the Women, which had not been terribly well received. And anyway, in the end, he said to me, I would like you to be on set for the whole shoot, which is very unusual anyway. And Altman's reputation with writers made it even more unusual, really. And he did say it. And he said, your job is to make sure I'm not making a mistake by accident. He said, if I'm making a mistake deliberately, that's different. But I don't want to make any by accident. So, of course, it was quite a hard job because you only opened your mouth if something was wrong. You didn't say, oh, Bob, what a well-directed scene. You just kept stum. And so the moment you spoke, you'd say, no, she isn't Lady Smith, she's Lady Mary. She wouldn't be in the dining room. That table is wrongly laid. This suitcase isn't, it wouldn't be on the main staircase, Bob. You know, it was just no. And that I did find quite difficult. We had a wonderful script supervisor, and every now and then, when I felt I'd said no often enough, I'd say to her, you do the next lot of no's. and I nudge her when it was time. Bob, I'm afraid this won't work. But that was why. But, you know, it was interesting. Very early on, we were all there. I forget now why. I think for wardrobe tests or something like that. So there was quite a lot of the cast there. And we were all talking, you know. And one of the actors said to me, oh, well, I don't really, in this scene, what you, blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, well, you know, when I wrote that scene, I was thinking about the experience of playing my uncle, my cousin, my wife, with a blah, 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 blah. And Bob took me to one side afterwards, and he said, absolutely not. He said, that's never going to happen again. From now on, when they want to know anything about a scene, they come to me. And if I want to know what you think, I come to you.
There you go.
And I thought it was such a lesson in the filmmaking. And he didn't really even like it if I sat with the actors at lunch and things. And which, of course, it was quite, in a way, slightly difficult because I'd been an English actor for 25 years then, or 30 years, whatever. So I'd worked with lots of them. I knew lots of them. And so I did. It was a sort of discipline I had to impose on myself. But I don't tell that story as if Bob was wrong. I don't think he was wrong. I think he was right. And that they needed. And sometimes he would come to me and say, in this scene, you know, blah, 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 blah. But I understood the principle, and I think he was correct.
Yes, well, it's that classic thing where, you know, the director is the boss on a film set, but then in TV, of course, it's the head writer, showrunner, executive producer who's the boss. So you finally got to be the boss down.
Well, I think being a boss is usually illusory, as there are so many elements you can't control. Right. It's like getting Final Cut. You get Final Cut and you're frightfully puffed, and then the distributor says, it's great you've got Final Cut, but if you leave that scene in, I'm not distributing it. And then your Final Cut rather fades away. So I don't think one should ever think one has more power than one really has. But I mean, I don't want to sound as if I'm anti-actor. Of course, I'm not at all. And the actors were very helpful to me. And I remember one particular moment with Maggie Smith when there was a big dinner scene, as you say, the dinner scenes, which were the endless sort of footmen, all the whole shebang. And we were in this scene, and there's a moment in it when the Bob Balaban character is talking about his film that he's Mr. Thing goes to whatever. And it's a country house murder mystery.
Right.
And he's talking about it a bit. Sylvia asks him a question or something. And Maggie says, and who turns out to have done it? And he said, Bob says, oh, I couldn't tell you that. It'd spoil it for you. And she says, but none of us will see it. Right. And of course, to Bob Altman, he couldn't see why that was funny. Because for him, making a film is a lot of work. Yeah, and everyone's tried their best. Why is it funny that no one's going to go and see this film? And so all the other actors, of course, started saying, oh, yes, Bob, you're quite right. Why? That's not funny at all. They're not going to see the film. And everything. And I was standing there seeing one of my best laughs go up in smoke. And then, thankfully, Maggie intervened. And she said, I think I can make it work, Bob. And so then it was shot. And, of course, it was in all the trailers and everything else. So I was very, very grateful to her.
Mr. Weissman,
yes.
Tell us about the film you're going to make.
Oh, sure. It's called Charlie Chan in London. It's a detective story.
Set in London?
Well, not really. Most of it takes place at a shooting party in a country house, sort of like this one, actually. Murder in the middle of the night, a lot of guests for the weekend, everyone's a suspect, that sort of thing.
How horrid. And who turns out to have done it?
Oh, I couldn't tell you that. It would spoil it for you.
Oh, but none of us will see it.
Well, let's talk about Maggie, who, of course, went on to become the Dowager Countess of Downton Abbey. She gets your best zingers and knocks them out of the ballpark every single time. How does she relate to these awful women that she plays? Awful but hilarious, and often the most fun characters, but they are not nice people.
Well, I think Violet was quite nice.
Yes, the Dowager is sweeter, but you don't want to get on the wrong side.
No, you didn't want to be on the wrong side. And she was very disciplined, and she was as tough on herself as she was on everyone else.
Right, yes.
But Maggie had a kind of understanding. What makes her very rewarding to write for is she's very layered as an actress. She can play different things at once. And so she can be very, very funny in one scene, and then 5 minutes later have you crying. And, not everyone can do that, so that they don't turn into a different person. And she had a sort of grasp. I mean, of course, blimey, Violet went on for 12 years or whatever, so she had time to acquire it. But things like, there was a moment when Sybil died, Maggie or Violet came to the house and spoke to Carson about this thing. And it was the only time she touched him. She touched his arm. Never in the rest of 10 hours of Downton did she touch it. I thought that sort of detail was marvelous, really.
And not written. She did that.
I think she did it. I can't really remember, but whether I'd written it or not, she understood it. And then she walked across the hall, and just before she went into the drawing room where they were all sitting, waiting, she straightened up. Very good.
The best. Has there ever been a better? No. So how wonderful for you to have access to her like that.
No, it was fantastic.
We did not mention yet that this is a murder mystery, which was part of the fun of it, that you were guessing who it was, and it was that Agatha Christie thing. What is your relationship to the whole Agatha Christie of it all? Was it something that you turn your nose up, like, oh, that hoary old chestnut that we're going to make fun of, or do you have a serious appreciation for that genre?
No, I love Agatha Christie's writing, and I love whodunits, and I love Agatha Christie's style was to make it into like a puzzle, like a game that you played, and you were given false leads and all of that stuff. I loved all that. And But the emphasis in the film, of course, was an exploration of that life, much more than a whodunit. I mean, Bob Altman said to me once, "This isn't a whodunit, it's a who cares whodunit." And I think that was a fairly accurate assessment of it. But I enjoyed having the murder because just when you sort of thought, well, okay, I've got these people now, then you had a new track to bind them all together and to follow them through with. And I enjoyed that very much. And I remember Michael Gambon, originally in the script, was a clockmaker. He was taking clocks to pieces. And then Michael sent this message saying, would it spoil it if he was a gun enthusiast and was taking guns to pieces? Because I really am a gun enthusiast and I know how to take a gun to pieces. So, of course, I thought that was brilliant. So I changed it. And it was yet another example where, actors can be helpful to you if you'll only let them. And his precise movements through all of those scenes when he's working with the guns are very meticulous and very convincing for the simple reason that they're real. He knows what he's doing. And that somehow, in a way I can't really explain, comes off the screen. That if you get the details right, I mean, that's why I always fuss on and say, oh no, and she can't do that, and she must be on this side, and they would only pour from there, and so on. Obviously, there are people out there watching it, and most of them who don't know that. They don't know that a plate should be laid from the left and taken from the right. They don't know any of that. But if you get it all right, there's a kind of quality of believability that comes over the film or the television show, and it seems believable. It doesn't seem necessarily a way of life that you approve of. You may disapprove of it very, very much, but it seems real. And that is something I believe, and it's something I'm happy to tell you that Robert Altman believed. He wanted the details right, unless, as I've said, he wanted to get them wrong to make some point or other. But basically, he wanted them right. He didn't want them approximate. And I loved that. I took to that like a duck to water.
And yeah, as an audience, like you said, we don't know, but we assume you know. And there's something very...
I hope you feel safe in the knowledge that you're in safe hands. That's what I'm after, is that the audience can feel, I can enjoy this film because I'm being looked after. I know I'm not going to be led up the garden path. And I hope that's what they think.
Well, if it has your name on it, you've certainly earned that seal of approval. I'm drawn like a moth to a light bulb when I see your name attached to a project, and it all started with this film.
Oh, well, that's jolly nice of you. Thank you.
It totally entranced me. Because I do love Agatha Christie, and I love the fact that it is a sort of the murder takes place as a sort of backseat to the social drama, but that it is a very satisfying murder, and it's a sort of even the solution is a red herring because it's not the murderer is not the murderer because he was already dead. I love that, and then a very emotional resolution to that between Maggie Smith and Eileen Atkins, two greats, and what a great moment when they sort of let their guards down and become two sisters united in grief. Wonderful scene.
Don't cry, Jane. They'll hear you. Come on. You did what you felt was best for him at the time. I see that now.
I've lost him. I've lost him. He'll never know me now.
Oh, at least your boy's alive. He's alive. That's what matters.
a lot of that scene was them. I wrote the basic scene, and it starts as my scene, but they then took it on to another stage. And, often that doesn't work. I mean, the word improvise is enough to make me reach for my smelling salts. So in that instance, it did work, because they were absolutely in key with each other. They were very well balanced in the scene. And I thought it was a marvelous, satisfactory, emotional moment, actually.
Oh, yes, very earned. And after so much repression over the course of the 2 hours of the film, to have people be real finally and emote is quite a resolution. It feels good, even though it's obviously a tragic exchange. But it did feel good to finally, let my girdle open and feel something.
Well, I thought Helen was wonderful. They both, Helen and Eileen, were both wonderful in the film. I did have one deal with Helen, I remember. There was, for some reason or other, she didn't want to say the line when Mary, the maid, comes down and they talk about the whole thing at the end.
Right.
And she says, but what about you? What about your life? And Helen says, didn't you hear me? I'm the perfect servant. I have no life. And Helen didn't want to say it. And I was very keen that she did, because for me, that is the essential irony of that way of life, is that the less life you have, the better you are as far as your employers are concerned. So it was really a completely contradictory situation, where the more you gave your life over to your employers, so the more you made their lives the most important factor, the better you were.
Right.
And I was very keen to keep it in. And finally, I remember she said, I don't think I need it. I think I express it anyway. And finally, we did a deal. There was another speech she thought was too long. And I said, okay, I'll cut that speech by a third if you say that line. And in the end, again, it became one of the theme lines of the film. So I felt I was sort of justified, really.
What gift do you think a good servant has that separates them from the others? It's the gift of anticipation. And I'm a good servant. I'm better than good. I'm the best. I'm the perfect servant. I know when they'll be hungry and the food is ready. I know when they'll be tired and the bed is turned down. I know it before they know it themselves.
Are you going to tell them?
Why? What purpose would it possibly serve?
What if they find out what happened?
Not much of a crime to stab a dead man, is it? They can never touch him. That's what's important, his life.
And your life?
Didn't you hear me? I'm the perfect servant. I have no life.
And where was Robert Altman in all this? I'm sure he had a say in the matter, no?
Oh, yes, I suppose he would have done, but he wasn't there. I can't really remember why. We were sitting on the set together talking, and he would have had a very strong word to say on the subject. But by then, the picture was nearly finished, and I think, we were sort of within sight of the end, and so those things get a little more relaxed, really.
Well, I'm glad you fought for the line. It is a wonderful line, and it does kind of explain a lot about everything about the film. So you said that, of course, this changed your life. You won an Oscar, but the film comes out. What is the first reaction? How is your life palpably different after this film comes out and is a big success?
Well, it was quite strange for me, because the very nice people making Monarch of the Glen had pushed all my scenes up, because originally I said I can't do the third series or whatever it is, because I've been asked to stand on the set while we're making this film, which is clearly an absolutely unique experience, and I'm not going to give that up to do the third series of this comedy show. But they were very good, and they said, no, what we'll do is we'll push up all your scenes to the end of the shoot, so that you can go through the film and then fly to Scotland and we'll shoot your scenes. Well, that was all very well, of course, and it was very nice of them to do it. But it meant that I was in every single scene, every day, for about 6 weeks. So learning lines like the sort of demented crazy man. And towards the end, I then was going to have a break. I think I wasn't in an episode or something. I forget now. But anyway, I was going to have a break. And at the same time, I received an invitation to fly out to New York with Emma.
Your wife.
And watch what really was sort of the final cut. I can't remember if there were any tiny changes, but basically we flew out to see the film. But of course, because I'd been working like an absolute drudge for 6 weeks, I hadn't really given it much thought. I mean, I'd sort of, anyway, and I wasn't, an important figure on the film in those days. And so we got to New York, and we were going into this screening. And I said to Bob Altman, what do you think of it, Bob? Do you think it's any good, really? Because I hadn't seen it before the screening. And he turned to me, he said, I think we've got lightning in a bottle.
Oh.
And then we went in and saw the film, and I suddenly sort of got it. I can't really explain it in a better way than that, because when you're on a set, you're worrying all the time about the details of this scene, of this movement. They said, oh, that line's getting lost behind that bunch of flowers, and you're fussing on. But you don't step back much, or at least I don't. And it was my first opportunity to step back and see it as a film. And it was fantastic. And then Emma went to the loo, I remember, and there were 2 or 3 women saying, oh, this is my favorite Altman movie. I can't believe it, blah, blah, blah. And so it was a rather marvelous evening. We then bounced away high in space for dinner somewhere with the cast and crew. And it was very happy. And then almost immediately, I got back and I finished the series. And almost immediately, I was rung up and told I'd won the New York Critics Circle Award. And that's not an envelope job. You're told you've won it. And you have to get someone to come and give the prize to you and so on. And I'd never won anything more than a cake in the village raffle, and so this was a big surprise. And then the award nomination, I didn't always win, but the nominations started coming in, and then I did win, various ones, and I won the Writers Guild Award, and of course, ultimately, I won the Oscar. So that was a rather extraordinary season in my life, marking the change that had come over my career. And of course, I was offered work fairly soon after it. And when I went back to London, I went back up to start on the next series of Monarch of the Glen, but I only did one more, and then I think I did 1 or 2 episodes to get myself out of it after that. But I went up to Scotland, and on about the first day, I was rung up by Cameron Mackintosh and asked if I would write what they rather confusingly called the book, which is really the script, of a new musical of Mary Poppins. And again, rather like with Gosford, I was very lucky in that, because I'd known the Mary Poppins books as a child. I had an aunt who used to read them to me in the bath, and I knew them pretty well. And of course, I'd seen the film. And Emma had only seen the film. She didn't know there were books. So that was rather interesting. And I wrote that show, and we put it on. And then we had the experience of a big hit in the West End of London, followed very shortly by a huge hit on Broadway in the Amsterdam Theatre. And it ran on Broadway, I forget now, 5, 6, 7 years, something. And it's never not been on since I wrote it. It's on somewhere in the world. And, again, I felt how lucky I was, because I'm sure, Cameron will forgive me for saying, I'm sure I was only offered the job because I just won the Oscar. And if the timing had been slightly different and he and Disney had made their arrangement of a co-production 3 months earlier, probably it would now be Tom Stoppard sitting here giving you his interview. So I did feel very sort of transported, really, by the whole thing. The whole experience was extraordinary, really.
I don't get to speak to many Oscar winners, and I have to ask, what is that moment like? Do you go blank? How does it feel to be up there under those lights, everyone's staring at you, and you're holding an Oscar?
Well, it was quite funny for me, because I remember I had looked at the Oscar, I think it was the year before, and one actor had been nominated for Best Supporting or something like that. And we all thought he was going to get it. The sort of word was that he was going to get it. I was watching my television. And then the moment came, and the cameras run up to the 4 nominees, or 5 nominees, whatever they are. And the Oscar goes to, because you can't say winner anymore, that's bad. So you say the Oscar goes to. And you can see them all slightly kind of leaning forward towards the camera that's covering them. And then it was a different name. And this guy, and I thought to myself, I mustn't be that guy. I mustn't be the one who swears and sinks back into his seat. And so I got my face all poised with a sort of what a good choice kind of generous expression. And I was clapping away because I was quite sure it was going to be Christopher Nolan, who was also up for a very, very brilliant film.
Was that Memento?
Memento.
Yes, okay.
Film. And so I was clapping away, and then Emma leant up and said, "It's you!" And so I went, "Oh my God!" And I jumped out of the seat and went up the aisle. And I remembered that in the car on the way there, it was not long after the terrible events of 9/11 and so on and all that. And we were saying it's going to be a lot of God Bless America tonight. And anyway, we got there, nobody said it. And as I was walking up the aisle, and it's quite far into the ceremony, I thought, well, I'm going to say it, because I don't believe I would have had my career in England. I was not the right type for the English establishment of that time. I don't say that particularly judgmentally. I mean, these things happen and certain types come in and go out. But the type favoured by the then theatrical and media establishment was not me. And so I believe it was because I had been chosen by an American director, an American producer, and given the opportunity that I was allowed to show what I could do. So I did say, God bless America. I mean, I made a little speech but I didn't prepare it because, one, I thought it would be unlucky. And the other, I didn't think I'd won. I thought Christopher Nolan had won. So it was slightly all on the hoof. And I had my Oscar given to me by Gwyneth Paltrow, who's a very nice woman, very, very nice woman. And of course, then you go upstairs to every journalist in the world who asks you all these questions. And of course, when you're a glamorous movie star, you go up on your own. But when you're a short, fat writer that nobody's ever heard of, they send you up with a glamorous movie star just to sort of cheer up the whole thing. So Gwyneth Paltrow came up with me, and we stepped out of the lift to this, extraordinary thing of flashing light bulbs. And I said, God almighty. And I never forgot, she said, "Welcome to my life," which I thought was rather chilling. But anyway, then they ask all the questions and everything. And then you're allowed, and Hollywood has rather charming bits of etiquette, which is that when you win a prize, an Oscar, and you hold it all night, you never let go of it, and you can go to any party you want to go to. It doesn't matter whether you were invited or not. You just turn up with the Oscar and in you go, which I thought was rather charming. And we went to all sorts of parties all over town. And I remember I'd sat next to Halle Berry at the rehearsal luncheon. And she said to me, Sissy Spacek's won mine. And I said, Christopher Nolan's won mine. and then the next thing we knew, we'd both gone to Elton John's party, and there she was, and we both won. We were both holding them. So we were dancing around the room, doing this kind of demented polka, jumping all over the place. I mean, it was a very good night, actually. And then gradually, they give you a sort of limousine the size of a swimming pool. And of course, all your friends who haven't got a hire car pile in. So by the end, you get to the 20th party and you've got about 30 people stuffed in the car. But it was very good fun. I loved it.
Amazing. Thank you. I think I got a taste of how your life changed that night. Julian Fellowes, this was honestly one of my favorite interviews ever. You are so delightful. I'm not surprised, but to actually experience it, this is my Oscar night. Thank you so much. Gosford Park, I encourage everyone to watch it. It's totally stood up. What a wonderful film. And then, of course, your contributions to TV are just immeasurable. How many Downton Abbey films have there been now? Has it been 2?
2. There have been 2.
It's amazing. You've created like a Star Wars universe of British aristocracy. It goes on and on. And Gilded Age, again, on HBO, incredible. And you bring it to America, and it's just so historically fascinating and wonderful. So I can't wait for season 2.
I hope you enjoyed. I'm really pleased. I think it's turned out jolly well.
Yeah,
and the actors. So we're very lucky with the actors. Again, we got such marvelous actors to be in it. So that a lot of it depends on that.
It's so wonderful, and if you love New York, all of it is just so great. I mean, it's a vacation every time I turn it on. So thank you for everything. It's so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for coming.
No, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Wow, thank you so much, Julian Fellowes. That was just such an extraordinary treat. What a great mind and personality. So thank you for coming on board and making the season finale to season 3 of It Happened in Hollywood so very special. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It was just such a pleasure for me to bring the show back after an over 2-year absence. And so I would like to extend a thank you to all of you for listening. I'd like to extend a special thank you to all my guests, and also Matthew Whitehurst, my producer, the unsung hero who makes me sound a lot more coherent than I actually am in the studio. So Matthew, thank you. He also tracks down all those amazing clips and puts them in, and he really is the secret ingredient of what makes this show work. And I have some great news, which is you're not going to have to wait another 2.5 years for season 4. We're going to be coming back in 2023. So look for us in the first half of 2023 for season 4. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Tell all your friends. Give us great reviews. And until then, I will see you in Hollywood.